What if I told you that becoming a master teacher isn't about charisma, long hours, or flashy tech tools? It's about understanding how the brain learns and using that science to transform lives. Welcome to Behind the Educator's Lens. I'm Robin Young, instructional coach and workshop presenter with Emotional Schools. Today's guest is someone I believe every educator should know, who is Dr. Nathaniel Swain. He is a cognitive scientist, educator, and the author of Harnessing the Science of Learning. He lectures at La Trobe University and has worked in schools, advised leaders, and is a powerful voice in evidence-informed, emotionally intelligent teaching. He is here to help us answer a core question: what actually works in the classroom, and how do we create learning that lasts? Let's get started.
Thank you so much for having me, Robin. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for coming. I'm so excited to have you. We're going to get started with a little round of this or that, and this helps me get to know you a little bit better. You don't have to explain your answer. You just tell me what you think quickly, okay?
Okay.
Okay, this one is heated to start you off. Science of learning or science fiction?
Science of learning.
Fair.
Although I really love science fiction as well, I have to say. But one I'm sort of obsessed with and probably read much more science of learning than science fiction.
Yeah, fair. My graduation, they just ended off with the last thing they said was live long and prosper. And that's how we ended
beautiful.
Our ceremony. So pretty cool. Early morning brain boost, coffee or brisk walk?
Definitely coffee.
Yeah, coffee then the walk, right?
Yeah, that's just me. Exactly.
Reading research papers or writing books?
Ooh, probably writing books.
It's fun, isn't it?
It's so much fun. Yeah.
Yeah,
You have to read, in order to write the book, you have to read lots and lots of papers. So you get both if you choose the second one.
Yeah, this is true. It really gets your mind thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, a classroom full of curious 5-year-olds or a room of grad students?
I'd take the 5-year-olds, definitely.
Really?
Love them.
That is the one grade where I'm like, no, thank you.
Yeah. No, you've got to, at one point in your career, you should try and get that sort of early age level to work. It's a challenge worth overcoming, I reckon. It's so rewarding.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Like when they don't even seem to know where they are in space or time. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to teach you something while you don't know where you are. But yeah, it's fun. Okay, let's do one more. One big aha moment or many small light bulb moments?
Probably many small aha moments, I'd have to say. Sorry, I just combined them. Many small light bulbs. That works. Little pieces, I think, then add up later. But yeah, if it's only, especially because I have people sometimes for a few hours, like some teachers I work with for like a few hour session, I'd want them to have a few little things rather than just one big takeaway, I reckon.
I'm so curious about that. Like in younger schools, obviously we move through different subject areas, but when you're teaching grad students, how do you keep them in that learning zone when you have them for so long? Like, doesn't their brain also max out?
Well, to be honest, when you break it down, and the courses that I've taught, you would have them for an hour a week or 2 hours a week for 10 weeks or 8 weeks, sometimes only 6 weeks. So it's actually not that long. You get them over a period of time, so you can get them reading, hopefully if they're reading, you can get them watching some videos or reading through some content, and then you can do the tutorials or lectures and so on. But in general, you don't get them for that long. I'd like to have them for longer, so I'd have more time with them. But yeah, you have to use what you get.
You're one of the few people I think that have figured out then how to teach the youngest and then how to just keep going with whatever age you want to teach.
And I do enjoy being thrown into any classroom, to be honest. So, one day I'm teaching 5-year-olds nursery rhymes. The next afternoon, I'm in a year 8 maths class and we're doing Pythagoras' theorem. And then on Tuesday, we're in a biomedicine 10th grade, sort of high school, quite content heavy lesson on this. Like, I just love it. I think it's all really exhilarating as a teacher, the interface between the teacher, the content, and the student learning. It's so fascinating.
I love that you look at that and that's exciting for you. Whereas
Yeah,
I
I
think
know
for
it's
a
like
lot of
glutton
other
for
people,
punishment.
they'd be
Yeah,
like, oh my God, where's the bathroom? Where do I leave?
cognitive load. Yeah, overload. Yeah, yeah.
You're like, this is my prime zone.
Fun. Yeah, I often do it with cameras on and teachers in the room watching, so it's like the pressure's
You
on.
do.
Yeah, but I kind of love it. Like, I think some teachers really embrace that performance element, and I think as
Yeah.
long as you just make it okay for yourself that making mistakes is part of teaching and it's part of learning, then
Yeah.
you take that pressure off yourself and say this isn't going to be perfect, but this is going to be fun and we're going to get as
Yeah.
much done as we can. And what doesn't work is actually interesting to talk about, with the audience later or to discuss with the students of what worked and didn't work in that lesson. And I think that's how we learn is we throw ourselves into the deep end and try as long as we've got all the tools that we need to survive that swim.
That is so fascinating. I love it. I would love to be in one of your classes where you're just like, all right, let's go.
Yeah, well, I often love a last minute sort of day. I've got a local school that I love working with sometimes. It's literally around the corner. It's near all my favorite coffee shops. And I've said to them, whenever I have a spare day, do you mind if I come in and cover for one of your teachers for like a casual day? And they've said, oh, well, definitely come in.
Of course.
But, it is actual joy to sort of jump into the classroom. And I really applaud just teachers that are willing in their school, like a lot of the time with teacher shortages, which I know you might be experiencing in Canada as well. Teachers, leaders have to be able to jump in and teach all kinds of things in order to just get through a day or get through a week. And I think we should applaud that ability to think on our feet and to be spontaneous because it's part of the job as well as the rigorous preparation and reflection and refinement. We also have to be very good at adapting on the spot.
I love that. That's so inspiring. So, can you please do me a favor and tell me what is the science of learning actually mean to you?
Yeah. So the science of learning, as probably the best definition of it, is as a body of knowledge. And that knowledge is continually being added to by more and more research. And then it's a culmination of insights and principles and ideas that have been theorized and rigorously tested to ensure that they relate to reality rather than just a really nice idea. And they tell us about how learning happens, how when it goes wrong, and how best to teach. So it's a broad body of research. Some people have argued that it shouldn't be the science of learning because it makes it seem like it's unidimensional. In fact, it's multidimensional. But I think whatever you call it, and you don't want it to be a buzzword anyway, so it's better to be specific about what you're referring to rather than just relying on a term to be a catch-all. It's basically what we know about great teaching and how we can best use it in the classroom. So insights around how students attend to learning, how they might get distracted, what students bring to the table and how important it is to connect knowledge to what they've learned before, to what they're learning now. Things like how to engineer focus and success and application of new learning in your classroom. And also to know that learning is an ongoing process of learning and forgetting and remembering. And that process of remembering is reconstructing the knowledge every time, not reproducing it, which I think Carl Hendrick is an educator and a researcher in this space. And he says that beautifully, that it's reconstructive, not reproductive when we retrieve information from our long-term memory. So forgetting and trying to remember is all part of the process as well. And teachers have to factor that in.
That's so fascinating, the idea that like forgetting is actually part of learning. Whereas I think in some of my teacher instruction, there was almost this thought of like, well, if your students are forgetting, what is it that you did not do in your initial
Mm,
lesson to make that learning stick beyond that initial lesson? But the big difference that I see in your book, and especially where you talk about interleaved practice, where
hmm hmm
you're moving between subject A, B, and C, I've actually not seen or heard that recommended before, where you're overlapping and going back to three different things rather
hmm
than
hmm Blocked
practicing them
practice. Yep.
one at a time and then moving on and kind of like setting and forgetting it and never going
hmm
back to it again. And it almost seems like a lot of our curriculum materials also.
Are made in a blocked or a massed practice sort of way. Yeah, they are. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think it's important for if people haven't heard of spacing or interleaving before, these are sort of two interconnected principles where instead of teaching things all at once or all at the same time, so like the equivalent of cramming before an exam is massed
Mhm.
practice, spacing that out over time so that there is opportunities between sessions or between learning experiences to start to forget, that can be really crucial to essentially get students retrieving, get students reconstructing that knowledge and therefore making stronger connections. We all sort of know intuitively that cramming doesn't lead to long-term retention. It may lead to short-term performance, but not long-term retention. But the solution, which I think you might have been taught in your initial teacher sort of training, that, oh, you just need to make every lesson memorable, is probably not that helpful either, because that sort of says, well, you need to make it exciting, you need to make it unforgettable, you need to make it exhilarating. And I actually talk about that in the book in one point where I say, well, if we took that approach, they would remember the exciting, exhilarating, and big explosions in experiments, or they would remember the trips to farms or to other places. But if you haven't done the other work and you haven't spaced that learning out over time, they'll forget the actual content, or they'll forget why they were seeing that or what the purpose of that was. So making things memorable, or trying to make it memorable through entertainment, is not the same thing as what you're describing there, Robin, which is actually, let's look at the learning and space it out, and know that forgetting is part of this process. So we have to account for that.
So how long would you revisit a topic for before you know when it's time to move on?
So that is actually a really interesting question, and something that the cognitive scientists and other researchers are trying to figure out. And look, it depends on the nature of the knowledge, the nature of the skill, how well embedded it is at the moment, and how familiar the students are with it, as well as just how complicated it is to learn. So the rule of thumb that you can sort of use informally as an educator, which is working for the time being before they create any magic formulas, is the idea that you review it, or you get students to retrieve it just before they start to forget it, is the ideal time. So when you're first learning something, they'll say you probably should review that the next day. But after that, you should space it out a little bit more and maybe do a few days later, or maybe the next week. After that, it might be the next fortnight, then the next month, then the next term. Excuse me. So the idea is that you can go sort of daily review from what you did yesterday, weekly review from what you did last week, monthly from last month, and termly from last term, or whatever you might call the breaks between parts of the school year different. We have 4 terms in Australia, which makes it nice and neat. There's 4 quarters. In most of the other parts of the world, it might be semesters with maybe a few other breaks. So you have to sort of think, what was I doing 3 months ago, is sort of the rule of thumb there.
I like that idea of thinking about where it was 3 months ago. The one thing I know from working with a lot of teachers, they would diet looking at the curriculum and saying, like, then how do I then time out my year so that I get through all this curriculum and also have them learn it effectively?
Yeah, and look, if you've never done spacing or interleaving before, it can be very daunting, because you sort of initially you have to teach a bit less in order to make space for this practice. So I think the thing to remember is, at the moment, it's really important to take a critical view of your curriculum and think, are my students retaining all of this content? Or am I just teaching to try and get through the content rather than to master that content? And so although it's not built into the way the curriculums are structured, you essentially have to sort of, build in opportunities for retrieval, or build in opportunities to go back over previous content, or to, maybe it's a 4-week unit, you might want to spend 5 weeks so that you can actually break it up a little bit, and to have some interspersing of other things, so that there is those opportunities to start to forget and then to retrieve. And then that review obviously means that there's less forgetting, which then means the next time you teach a similar topic, you don't have to start from so far back and try and catch them up again. They've actually retained and they've remembered all that content, rather than treating every year as like a blank slate. Start again. We're teaching fractions. They don't remember anything about fractions. We have to start from 0. If you retrieve, and if you break that same teaching across several weeks or several months, when you teach that topic again the following year, they'll still remember it, because they will have been doing a little bit of it on an increasingly large sort of schedule, from daily, weekly, fortnightly, monthly, termly.
So, big question for you. Since I work with a lot of beginning teachers in elementary, what I'm really interested in finding out is if there are key elements teachers should always consider when they're structuring their lessons to maximize the impact. Because what I notice a lot in their planning is that they will plan the thing that they want to teach, right? And they spend a lot of time gathering materials for what the students will work with. But then the piece that they forget about is planning how they're going to go about that teaching so that all of these materials actually do something. So what would you say to them to help them to set up, say, a lesson on addition, so that they're maximizing their impact in the classroom?
So with, say we're using a maths example, with certain kinds of knowledge or skills that you're trying to teach, it makes sense to break your lesson down into sort of three main components with a few extras on the side. The first extra that I'll talk about, which is where you should probably start, is a little bit of retrieval practice and some activating of prior knowledge. So I usually call that a lead in to the lesson. So that lead in depends on how long you've got. Sometimes you might have a bit longer for retrieval practice. Sometimes you've only got a few minutes. If you've got 5 or 10, that's even better because you get more practice of all those previous topics that you've taught before. But that lead in should also activate what they've learned in the previous lesson and how it connects to now. Because sometimes we think, I just need to plan the perfect lesson. But actually, the lesson is just one puzzle piece within a whole unit, which is a whole puzzle piece within a whole curriculum. So if you're just planning lesson by lesson, you're never going to get all of those connections to start linking up together. So activating prior knowledge is a part of the lead in that allows students to be like, okay, this is what I've done with addition so far. I've learned how to add numbers without renaming or regrouping, and I know how to do that. So I take the first number, I add it to the second number, I use my number bonds knowledge, or I count on if I don't know those ones, and then I write my answer. This lesson is actually addition with renaming. So we need to do something different where we're adding more than something to be able to change place values essentially, because we can't write 11 in the ones column. We'll need to think about what to do with that 110 and then 1 and break it up separately. So then the next major part is the I do. So this is the modeled practice of the lesson. And ideally, if you're teaching something new, every lesson should have a really strong I do, we do, and then you do. There's the three main parts that I'm alluding to. But the I do is where you show the students what you're trying to teach, the concepts, the skills that you're trying to teach them, and show it to them step by step. So if you're teaching an addition problem with renaming, you'll show the problem that happens if you try and put 2 digits in the ones column. So it doesn't fit. You might have the number house or something, an analogy like that shows that there's only room for one number in this room. So you need to create, or in this house, you need to create another house next to it to put the next number. So the ones live in this house, and next door the tens can live in that house. And then later on, obviously the hundreds and the thousands live in the preceding houses. So you model that, you explain it, and you do some example problems in that I do. Before you move on though, you should probably do a CFU question. Make sure that your explanation worked. Maybe get students to see if they can spot what's important about the problem that you've modeled and shown. Do a CFU or a checking for understanding question to see if they understand the concept or the skill that's really important before you get into some more practice. And if it's okay to go on, there's just a few more parts before I round it all out together, if that's okay.
Yeah,
but stop me anytime. So the I do is really important because there's that chance for students to hear you think aloud how to solve it, but also to explain all the background information, the background concepts, background skills, and to show how it's all meant to work. And do a CFU question to see if that explanation's stuck. If it doesn't stick, go back and reteach it before you proceed through the rest of the lesson. Do more teacher model before you move on. The part that I think a lot of teachers leave out is the next bit. It's the we do. So the we do is the guided practice where teachers and students are solving problems together or one after another, and the teacher can see step by step in real time if the students are getting it or not. So you might have, with maths, you might have concrete materials that the students are using that matches what the teacher's been modeling with. You might have mini whiteboards, which I don't know if there's a mini whiteboard boom in parts of Canada like there is in Australia, but a lot of schools are buying mini whiteboards to help see the things in guided practice or in checking for understanding questions. So in that guided practice phase, the teacher is showing another problem that matches what they've explained before, and then students get to do a matching problem that with different numbers or slightly different not the exactly same copying from the teacher, but following the same process, using the same skills, and allowing the teacher to see, checking all the whiteboards, checking and seeing how students are going, have they got it at this stage? And if they haven't, more practice, more opportunities to get it. And if there are any variations, like maybe there's some problems with renaming and there's some problems without, that's when you can introduce those variations, because you shouldn't just throw those in to the independent practice and see what they do with it. That's a way to allow some students to do really well and others to fall apart because no one's shown them what to do when you need to rename. They're going to start putting the 11 or the 12 in one box, for example, which doesn't work when you're doing the more complex addition. So the final step, to make sure that they've really understood that lesson, the main sort of end point is the you do. So that's when you give a task, which obviously that might be the materials that your colleagues are sourcing or finding, what you want the students to work with, what worksheet or game or activity that they're doing. But that you do task should match what you've been modeling, what you've been showing, and what they've been practicing in the guided practice. So that's the you do part. And it's not just set and forget. That independent practice is a time for the teachers to rove and to help if needed, to identify common problems. If you've not picked up that there's a misconception and you see it in 2 or 3 places, grab all those 3 kids and start working with them again in a small group. Don't just let them struggle. Actually help them out then, and make sure that time is really well spent. And the final part, if you're doing a really bare bones lesson, I like to call the check out or the reflection at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So you bring the lesson back together. You sort of say, what have we learned today? How has it helped with your learning? Let's reflect on whether it worked or not. Maybe revisit your success criteria. And that way you sort of round out with a strong example. Sometimes you can show on there's things called document cameras where you have like a little camera that shows the student work and it goes up on the screen. Beautiful, amazing technology. You can put someone's work up there and show what they've done. Even if it's not perfect, you can show how to fix it and build that culture of error, that making mistakes is part of learning. Or if it's a really great example and you want to put a spotlight on the student that's done really beautifully, you can then show that work and say, look, we've all learned how to do addition with renaming today. I'm so excited for what we'll learn next time. And that, is really what the lesson should look like. And how it falls apart sometimes is that we fixate on getting the activities or the you do part of the lesson right, as well as either spending too little or too long in the teacher model sort of part. And to get it to work, you have to do just enough teacher modeling and then just enough guided practice, but not too much of any one thing. It needs to be just enough to then release them to the independent task so there's enough time to practice and see if they can do it by themselves. But we don't want them to just be dependent on the teacher all the time. They also need to generalize. So that's, I guess, my little intro, and it really does align beautifully with the principles from explicit instruction, from Anita Archer's work, as well as other schemes like explicit direct instruction, which is Hollingsworth and Ybarra in the States as well.
Yeah, that sounds a lot of what I started to do when I was going down a very specific path when I was teaching 3rd grade math. And I remember having someone come and watch and they asked, well, what about, multiple intelligences? Or what about, the kids with different access points? How are you creating space for that? And, my answer always was, well, perhaps we can do those things after we've learned what we're doing. But it's really important that I have all the kids in a place where they all have access to it first, and then perhaps we can start creating some multiple means, but I'm not sure what you think about that.
It's a question that a lot of teachers are grappling with right now, especially as they move from more rotations, or I don't know if you call them learning centers or activities that they sort of set up and the students basically teach themselves while you might be working with one group at a time. When you do sort of move to working with the whole class initially, like you're talking about there, Robin, the big challenge is, well, how do I cater for one group when there's so many differences between all the learners? The big sort of takeaway that I've picked up and I've tried to talk about in lots of places with teachers is the idea that the first step to being a really adaptive and a really responsive teacher is to teach really, really well. And not just in that one lesson, but in all the preceding lessons, so that as much as possible, you've given all your students access to all that prior learning and prior knowledge that would hopefully set them up for success in your classroom. And that's not pretending that you can get it always perfect and everyone's going to be in the same place, nor do we want them to always end in the same place. But ideally, you've got a foundation to work from that's solid, and that if it's not solid, that's where your attention's going to be. You're going to fill in those blanks around number bonds, around place value, maybe times tables, whatever gaps your students have, you're going to ensure that you fill those up with other parts of your numeracy or your mathematics teaching. So, doing lots of fluency or lots of building up those foundational number skills elsewhere, not in this formal lesson sense, but in that sort of practice, give feedback, get them excited about it, all that sort of stuff. But once you've got them in the lesson and you've done some of that background work, if you have a really solid lesson that's really well explained, that's really well paced, that has lots of opportunities for students to practice and respond, it's not just them sitting there and listening, they're actually able to say things, do things, write things, respond. That kind of teaching is actually beneficial to everyone, no matter what their preference is or whatever their wondering is about how they prefer to learn. It's actually really engaging, really hard not to focus and to really learn as much as possible. And the way that I think some people get to this solution, if you like, for how do I cater for all these differences, is the idea that every lesson should be a beautiful, solid lesson that's well structured, but should have a low enough floor that everyone in your lesson can experience some level of success. That floor, though, doesn't have to be your end point. It's your starting point. So otherwise, you can also build in different levels of challenge across multiple opportunities in that lesson. So say you've got a CFU question, you have it on the board. It's one example that is similar to the other example that you've just shown. The first one is straightforward. It's your base level example. You might even call it your mild example. So mild, like not spicy. So just easy, like not too challenging, but showing the skill that you're trying to practice. Everyone does that one first. But straight next to that one, onto the next part of the slide or next part of the board or in the worksheet, there's a medium example that goes further, and maybe two of those, so that they've got something to do next if they find that one too easy and they're ready to go to the next one. And then on the other side, a bit further across, you can have something a bit more spicy, something harder, something more challenging, something that's going to really keep those students who are high flyers and who find the foundations of this lesson somewhat too easy. That's where they're going to really shine or really challenge themselves or go further. And it may well be open-ended. It could be missing numbers. It could be more complex comprehension questions. It could be drawing upon other subjects. And essentially every time you present a question that you're wanting the students to work through, it could have that different level or different gradient, if you like, of challenge. And the idea is the only way that you have to sell it to students is you don't sell them you're low, you're medium, you're high, or you're green, blue, or red. Instead, you say, well, everyone starts here. They move to here if they've got time, and if they've got time, they try here. And that really solves the problem because no one has to be predetermined into any one group. You don't have to teach your low group in a different way necessarily in this initial instruction. Instead, they can work through that first example, and if they finish there and they finish strong, then fantastic. They've done the base level example. If you've got other students who are usually medium attaining or sort of high attaining, they should be able to finish those first ones relatively easily and spend most of their time on the harder ones. And the same kind of approach could be the task that you give at the end, the independent task, with maybe some adjustments saying that there's extra hard examples for those who need it and maybe some extra base level examples for those who need those. But otherwise, you can get that whole group participating in a learning community, working together. You can give all of that real-time feedback and all that real-time support because you can see all the students working at once. You can see their answers on mini whiteboards. They're working with their partners. They're sharing responses with you as a teacher, and you can make decisions and be responsive. And then after the core lesson, of course, do a small group if you need it. Pull an advanced high group to challenge them. Pull a low group or a group that's having difficulty based on the task to give them more instruction. The solution, I think, to differentiating or making adaptations that cater for need is to have a core lesson with different levels of challenge built into it. Sometimes I call built-in differentiation or built-in adaptations. And what it does is it makes sure that everyone is enriched, supported, but also potentially challenged if they want to take that challenge. Not everyone, just like in the salad bar, not everyone needs to put all of the same things on their meal, but everyone starts with the same base, if you like. So you can challenge yourself and go to the spicy level if you really want to, or you can just be happy with mild. What's great about this is you don't even have to use that language with students. You don't even have to tell them which ones are mild and which ones are medium and which ones are spicy. That could all be behind the curtain, if you like, of the lesson. It's just a framework for the teachers to use. In that case, students are just working through those examples and they do as many as they can in the time available. And as long as you tell them that it doesn't matter how many you get done, I just want you to try your best and use your time well, then the expectation is everyone's challenging themselves at the level that they're ready to challenge themselves. And for me, for most schools that I'm working with who have this exact problem, that exact question that you've had, this is like a game changer. Because it says to them, I can have a solid 20, 25, maybe 30-minute lesson where I've got everyone working and they're also challenging themselves at different levels because I've got that built into my materials or my presentation or my board work. And when they start the task, I know what to do because I've been watching all the learners that whole time. I've been checking responses on the mini whiteboards. I know who I need to work with next. I've got my lows are doing great today. They're fine. They're going to start their task. I'm going to go to my highs because I noticed that I didn't make it hard enough. I'm going to bring them down and improvise and or use a pre-planned extra lesson that challenges them even further to keep them, on the hook of getting excited about learning even though they're doing really well. Or the opposite. I'm going to work with 1, 2, and 3 students. They're not usually my low students, but in this lesson, they had a lot of trouble, so I'm going to be responsive to that. The worst of both worlds is trying to break your instruction in lots of different parts and teaching all of those core lessons 5 different times at different times during the year because eventually everyone cycles through that same content. because then they get less instruction and you've boxed them in. So you've decided you're the low group, so you're going to go slower, or you're the low group, so you start here, not here. In this different paradigm of adaptive teaching with high quality, responsive practice, instead, you give every student a chance to be a high achieving student if they want to. If they want to really challenge themselves and push themselves further, it might take them a few lessons, but they could easily be completing mild and medium every lesson if they wanted to. If you've done your teaching well, if they've learnt all the preceding building blocks, which also should be built into your curriculum.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So I think
Final
that's
question.
where we need to go next. Yeah, and knowing how to get that to work, which with whatever subject, with whatever area. And look, I've read Carol Ann Tomlinson's work. I've read a lot of the stuff on differentiation. I've reread it recently to try and wrap my head around it. And I think what she describes in a lot of her books, I don't mean to cause any offense at all when I say this, is something that's somewhat unrealistic for a lot of teachers and would require a huge amount of personal time, constantly be inventing and reinventing materials, resources, assessment tasks, conversations, conferences, and would mean that there's not a lot of quality instruction time with the group. Instead, it's all broken up into these little pieces. And you can see it as varied and specialized and differentiated, or you could see it as patchy, fragmented, and all over the place. But I've seen both in different classrooms. The teachers that can make Carol Ann Tomlinson's work well are, amazing, gung-ho, incredible teachers. And they're also probably a little bit lucky that the differences between their lowest and the highest students aren't impossible. But the run of the mill mainstream teacher who just wants to get the most out of their day, I think we've set them up to fail with that model of, your instruction should be broken up into many, many different tiny pieces and everyone's on a different journey and you have to plan 5 times as much. I think it's unworkable.
Yeah, and I think that also might be feeding the burnout rates that we already see with the professionals that are
It's
in the,
impossible.
you
Yeah.
know, yeah, I think it was in the first 5 years, right? We lose
Just
about half of the
Yeah.
professionals.
And that's the same
And
around the
so,
English speaking
yeah,
world. And it's like, why is that? That
yeah.
professions don't burn through so many people. Why is it that we only get the people who are, somehow make it work or don't have any other options? Why are we only attracting and retaining those workers? Like we should be a profession that is rewarding, fulfilling, but also realistic. And I think it's possible to be more realistic using better tools.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the solution is that you need to come to British Columbia.
Well, it's good, I think, for teachers to believe that this is possible, they have to see
Yeah,
it in action. It is very
yeah.
true because a lot of people will, rightfully question, like, how is this actually feasible? How would
Hmm.
this ever work? When they haven't seen it themselves. But I don't think, in many cases, I've seen the kinds of differentiation that's been described in teacher guidance or teacher books over the last 20 years. I've never really seen that in action either. I've never seen that as a reality. I think it's a really lovely picture and it's really nuanced and beautiful, and it would be like a utopian vision of education. But I usually see the excesses or the problems that happen when you attempt to do that. And as you said, it leads to burnout. It leads to teachers feeling overworked, and it may well lead to some students progressing through the year and not making that much progress because how much instruction have they had? They've had a few mini lessons each week for the
Mm,
entire year rather than solid core instruction and
hmm.
tailored additional small instruction on top of that. That's going to be a better use of the student's time and the teacher's time, in my opinion.
Yeah, and then hopefully minimize the amount of kids that are leaving our school system not being able to read.
Yes. Well, it's like, how is it if we're doing such a good job with differentiation and small group instruction and breaking up our teaching into tiny little parts? If that's working so well, how is it possible that so many are leaving elementary? I'm trying to find the right words. Elementary
Hmm.
school or middle school
Hmm.
without core literacy skills, or many, many years behind what they should be able to do.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I really appreciate you spending your time with me.
It's an absolute joy, and thank you for asking very big but very important questions. And I just, if anyone's listening to this and thinking, "Wow, this guy's got a lot to say," I apologize in retrospect because yes, I do, I do have a lot of things to, I guess, answer those big questions with because they're quite nuanced, and I think
Yeah,
these are the conversations we need to have, right?
I definitely agree. And I feel like you have not spoken too much. I feel like you've not spoken enough. This information it is not like it's common sense in a way, but we've gotten so far away from the I do, you do, we do method of making sure that all of our kids are scooped in our lesson. I feel like having somebody's clear voice bring us back to, okay,
These
what
are
are
the
we doing here?
non-negotiables. Yeah. And look, and just in case people are listening and thinking it's all or nothing, like each lesson is going to be determined by, just how long everything takes is determined by how your learners are responding or what they're doing or what they've learned before. So what I love about this work is that yes, there seems to be like a structure or a formula that you can try and use or some principles to follow. But at the end of the day, it is going to be determined by how you are finding your students are responding, by how well you can adapt things in the moment to sort of make it work and be spontaneous as well as pre-prepared. And that some subjects will call for different proportions of these things. So I think just having the conversation about what we're trying to achieve and how we can best achieve it, and then reflecting on when it works and when it doesn't work. I think that's where we can learn quite a lot from each other. And I'm blown away by the ideas that people take into their classrooms, the things that they perfect. And many years ago, a colleague of mine said that if you work in this context, if you work at the coalface in the classroom, this is how practice can actually lead research. And I was really confused by that because, doing my PhD,
Hmm.
being really dedicated to the evidence and the research base, I was like, practice leading research, how can that be? But now I
Mm-hmm.
understand it because every classroom is like a laboratory and every teacher
Yes.
is a scientist and we're all trying many different things all at once. And yet we might not always do it systematically, so it's harder to see what's working and what's not working. But there is knowledge and there is amazing skill that teachers can develop and continue using, especially if they get nudges or hints in the right direction. And that this is how, the teaching profession can solve its own problems. We don't need a big research study to tell us what's effective. We probably know most of those things. What we need
Hmm.
is the will and the stamina and the support for teachers to be able to reinvent how they want their profession to look. And I think that's a really exciting time to be a teacher.
I think so too. Thank you for taking your time with me today.
Thanks, Robin. It's been a pleasure.